Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include them in our role-playing campaigns. With me, as ever, my erstwhile co-host is Hamilton, and I'm Fiona. Hello, Hamilton.
Hello, Fiona.
How
How
are
are you?
you? Oh no!
we
Oh,
said it at the
jinx!
same
We can't do
time.
we can't
No,
do the rest of the podcast. That's the end of that.
I spoke before you said jinx, so it's fine. Doesn't
Damn,
count.
damn. I'm doing all right, thank you. I've been reading a lot of stuff for GM's book club.
Yeah, me too. Me
Which is
too.
it's quite funny because you put up a post saying like, "Oh, look, I'm a fantasy role player," and I was like, "I'm in the theater, literally reading about it." Oh, you're holding it up to the camera so I can see it. Yes, the starter set.
That's the start set I got yesterday. Picked up yesterday
Yesterday. Whoa.
because I
Yeah.
had the core rules, and then I thought I bought both of them on Vinted of all places.
Vinted. No way.
Yes.
I thought that was like a clothing thing. That's pretty
Yeah.
fucking cool.
And there was what I bought them from the same person like 2 months later from the different.
You're like, hello.
Hello again. I'll
It's
have
me.
the other thing you've got. I did like an offer on it, so it's like
Mm.
it's just been here for a while.
Let's just talk about
Let's
it.
haggle.
Yeah.
But
That's cool.
obviously I got the digital edition when they did the whole Humble Bundle, was it a while ago?
Yeah.
And so I've just been organizing through all of those.
Yes.
It's quite good.
I've done exactly the same thing, actually. I bought the Humble Bundle recently, and my big chill out thing I've been doing, because work's been rubbish, as I always sort of say, is that I go through my RPGs folder on Google Drive, put them all into alphabetical folders, make sure they're titled correctly, getting rid of duplicates, and it took me about a week, and I felt so good at the end of it.
That's so good.
Very zen.
I've gone into iBooks and made collections and locate, because then you can see the pictures I've tabbed up the whole of it. I'm ready to talk about it.
Well, unfortunately, that's not what we're talking about today.
No, it's not.
But hey, you know what? I appreciate that it's another thing that we're doing, so that's really cool. Hamilton, what are we talking about today in this really impromptu, sort of chitty-chatty DM's Book Club?
Well, it was brought about by your very high level, long lasting 5-year.
I think it is about 5 years. I think we started it in 2018.
5-year running campaign finally coming to a close.
Yes.
And you've been waiting for that close for quite a while. So
yes. Again, we'll go into the sort of the pros and cons or something like that. But yes, we have finally finished our 5-year long Xerios campaign, which we originally started out in person, and we did a bit of not streaming but pre-recording.
You can find the first however many episodes.
I think about 50 episodes.
50 episodes online, yeah.
As long as you can deal with some really bad audio, but that's okay.
It's very much 2018, early days of streaming, people doing D&D.
Exactly, so. But there's some really, I mean, obviously I'll say this about myself, but that, about anything
was
I'm
amazing.
It was really good. Like there's some real, I've still got clips. I used to do clips of it before ye old TikTok and Reels and stuff. I used to clip the bits I liked and then put them up, and I was like, these are quite funny bits that we're all funny in. And then we obviously went online during the pandemic, and then we got to last July where it was like the penultimate session, and then DM was like, let's do it in person for the finale, and then we mated 8, maybe 9 months, and then all the things aligned, and then we did it in person a couple of weekends ago. In total about a 10-hour session in person, and we finished it.
That is I've never had a session that long. I don't
really
think. No, I've never done a whole day of D&D.
But what about yourself, Hamilton? Because I know you've spoken about the end of campaigns, but you both, you've done longer campaigns both as a GM, and you've played in them as well. Like, what's your sort of, what are you bringing to this table?
What am I bringing? I haven't got a 5-year running one.
No, sorry, I have like humble brag mic drop. Yeah.
I've got a 18-month long campaign, I believe it was. So starting in 2018, same as you.
Wow.
So October 2018, moving to I lie. October of 2019, because we had a year with another GM. So that one was a year. So it was October 2019. Then obviously Pando happened, moved to the online, because I took on GMing because my GM, we didn't ever finish that campaign that we did for a year because he got too busy with work. So I said, I'll take over GMing. That's when I did Dragon Heist. And then we ran that until the end of 2020. So it was, just into 2021. So and that was, Dragon Heist. The thing is, we have not actually done the final follow-up, finish off the campaign episode.
So no epilogue.
We never did the epilogue. We got to the final battle, got to the dragon bit, yeah, we'll get together, and never happened. So I didn't
Yes.
have the catharsis that you
The
had.
closure, yeah,
Yeah, I have
absolutely.
tried to organize it when like lockdown after 2001 stopped. I was like, oh look, we're all going back to reality again. Let's sort
Yeah.
it out. But it never worked out. And
Yeah.
and then obviously the Bowies and Spelljammer, which is yet to come
Yes.
out, but we are having an epilogue session on Thursday, because we
Nice.
did bit of the epilogue, but it was getting past midnight, and we were like, look, come on,
Properly
let's
take our time with it,
take our
yeah.
time on it.
Oh,
But
wow.
we did the epic battle and all that stuff. So yeah, pretty much finished. So yeah.
Very cool, very cool. And can I ask, not that you've ever really mentioned it on here, but the Bowies and
Mm.
Spelljammer, what level is that? What level
So
have you
that
gone to then?
is, they've gone from 10 to 12, but there's some people at 15.
Wow, that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. So high level stuff. So
Yeah.
both of us have sort of come into that. And also say as well, on in terms of other RPGs,
Mm.
I've done what I felt was a very long campaign of Alien up for a stream
Oh yeah.
recently. Which was 8 sessions, and that was
Yeah.
obviously slightly different because we had to finish the story in 8 sessions. I think we're just sort of collectively sort of coming together just to chat about like some of the key takeaways, both as GMs and both as
Mm.
players in long running campaigns.
Mm.
And the first thing I want to start off is like, it does take a lot of effort. Like for us with the 5 year long campaign,
Mm.
it took us a month to sort it out our diaries, mostly because I'm a busy person. Because I'm not necessarily I'm very popular or anything. I just make myself busy. We organized it so that we would do weekly sessions on Mondays. As long as everyone checked in beforehand, that we say, "Hey, are we still up for
Mm.
Monday?" Then it would work. Especially when we were doing it in person, because obviously I had to bring equipment from work. We had to get
Yep.
snacks in. Our DM had to
Yeah.
do all the prep and stuff. So realistically, we missed maybe about a handful of Mondays due to works, people being sick, and then
Holiday.
obviously holiday. Yeah, bank holidays was always an interesting one because I was the only one that would remember, because people forget and then they're like, oh well, I'm just gonna hang out with my family, or I'm gonna be a long weekend away. And it's just like, we don't mind as long as you know, because
Mm.
there's nothing worse than just sort of waiting around because you've been left on a cliffhanger and there's like, oh, we're not doing anything today because I've not prepped anything. Which
Yeah.
for me, the two big takeaways right at the top of the essay that I want to talk about is
Yeah.
commitment. You have to
100%.
commit, and you have to be prepared to be on the fly about stuff, especially as a GM, like, because people don't turn up, people won't remember, etc. But and
Mm.
looking at the Alien stuff, I knew I had these folks, these players for these 8 weeks. And
Yeah.
then we had a delayed start because there was some other issues that were going on. Like, so we had to delay the week. And when somebody wasn't well, we had to say their character was just doing background animations. We couldn't just be like, well, we can't do it because one
Mm.
person isn't there. If there was like half the majority of the cast couldn't make it, then we wouldn't be able to do the stream.
I
But
think
we managed
having
to do.
those things in place is
Yeah.
a very useful thing, and having like a ruling system, because we did that as well. Like we had someone couldn't make it, but we could make it work for that session.
Yeah.
That it's different when you're streaming or you're making content, I guess. But when you're at home, yeah, we just can have things in place. Like
Yeah.
they just decide to go on a little personal adventure this
They
week.
get taken out for
Yeah.
plot reasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
May I ask, with your Dragon Heist one, how many
Yeah.
players did you have for that?
I had remind myself 1, 2, 3, 4 players.
You had four players. Yeah,
Four
that's
players.
interesting.
Yeah.
So we for our Xerios one, we only had 3 players,
Mm.
and that obviously someone disappears from that, which we had I think once or
Yeah.
twice. We didn't play because we felt
Yeah.
that we all agreed, like, as long as we know
Mm.
about it, we don't want to leave someone out, especially if it's an important point. But I think with 4 more players, it's a little bit easier.
Well, just having 2 people, you feel very much like you're leaving someone out. But when you've got 3 and one person isn't there, you're still a group, and
Yes.
you feel like a group, not like 2 people on your own, which feels
Yeah.
very like isolating. Like we had our ranger. It worked kind of well because I had ways to make it work. And in Dragon
Yeah.
Heist as well, particularly as a campaign setting, you're in a city. So like
Yes.
doing errands and the way the campaign works, it's very much like there's lots of downtime bits where I put extra things in. So if they weren't a part of that little mini quest, it's kind of normal. It's like, oh, you just go to this merchant who's really a demon and fight and have to do the mini quest this week. I ran it very much like GTA, as in I had the map with little icons, the GTA like letters on the map of Waterdeep saying,
that is very cute.
You've
Sorry.
got this. These are your points of interest, because they had like loads of little branching. Because I just added loads of little stories that were personal stories as much as the main quest, and so they just had these things that it's like, okay, well, one of them was like, they saw someone who looked like their twin come into a pub, and they chased after them and couldn't find them, but that was on their list of need to figure out who this person is who looks like me. And someone mentioned it. So they did that quest one week when someone else wasn't there. So it doesn't really mean anything to the other character, but the key character's there and the other two are just helping out.
Yeah, having those side quests. And I think it's interesting because obviously for you, that was a published adventure. For us, for the longer one, that is, homebrew. I think you can be a little bit more like judging of like, okay, we're at this point now. We're now going to go into a massive battle where I think we need to all be there for that. So that's something as a GM. But similarly, I've been discussing about restarting Curse of Strahd. Because obviously we did do that for a little bit with me running it, and then it fell apart due to commitment time. And as always, myself on that, not just the players, I would hastily say. But that's an interesting one because obviously it's very hard in that setting, I think, to disappear off, which is not like we're now going to have one-on-one time with Strahd, or you're not, people like, so you're in a place which is a vast sandbox and stuff. So I do think like compared to Dragon Heist, which is great, I love that GTA element of like side quests that you can get on and people split up and stuff. That's really cool because then you can have that moment later on where they're like, oh, you're back, so here's what happened whilst you were away, and then doing a 20-minute or whatever like spotlight so that they don't feel missing out, which I think is easy to do in certain settings compared to others.
I mean, when I did the Shattered Realm one, we did, I remember once Luke couldn't be there. And we had to, like, for other reasons, and that all fell apart. But other, like, so we're trying to compete with another campaign, and that all got very confusing. But we did like we'll go on this little side quest adventure, and because Luke can't be there, we will make it so that he's afflicted. Oh, DSB Book Club people will know about this. We went to the color and black and white domain that we made up, and so I made it that they were afflicted with the Feywild issue that needed to be fixed. So the whole process of the story is, they're not here, they're suffering from some sort of effect.
They're still a part of it, but they're still engaged in some way because this has happened to them. And then
but the fact that they're not there doesn't matter because the whole point is it's about saving them. Like in Critical Role when Laura and Travis are off because Laura's having a baby, they get kidnapped in the show.
Conveniently just go, absolutely.
And so that becomes the whole impetus of the story. And then when they come back, it's when they come back, sort of thing.
I do think having a sit down, again, I know we always talk about session zeros and managing expectations, having that at the beginning, lines and veils, safety tools, obviously depending on, well, not depending on, you should always have them, but obviously for certain settings, so the horror settings, obviously you should talk about those a little bit more for those sort of genres. But I do think an exit plan for whatever reason, so like we can't make it for a couple of sessions because you know of a big event happening, so they don't feel guilty that they have to commit. And this is one thing I do want to say. We did discuss it in quite a bit of detail after we had our own Ask Me Anything to the DM after we did our 10 hours stuff. So that went on for another 2 hours of us talking about it, which was I would actually recommend having the Ask Me Anything stuff because that's always really interesting for maybe players who are DMs, I guess. I don't know about players themselves because it's always like, have I missed this? Did I collect that, etc. But setting that expectation and that commitment stuff, we were always like, we're going to do it to as long as we can. And we got to level 20 and that was great. But some people just, if they're not interested in the story or if they're struggling a bit to be engaged because it's online or anything like that, I think saying we'll have a review a couple sessions in, and whether that's about, hey, I don't like my character anymore, or I want to change some things. I've definitely been open to like, we'll play a couple of sessions. If you don't like your character, we can swap it out. We can change stuff like with the.
It's a really good idea. I like that.
With the possible restart of Strahd, like they very much like their characters, but one person was like, well, I made some choices I don't really like, and I was like, well, let's talk about it. I'm not going to be like, well, you're locked in now.
Are you going to restart where you got to, or are you going to start from fresh again?
So this is a very interesting point because obviously Curse of Strahd, the way we set it up, we had 5 players, and we're going to come back with 3 players. We did the Death House, which is that introductory adventure. I'm not going to run it through
the Durst one.
The Durst one, which I love it, but I'm not.
I'll hate that house.
Putting its face in its hands. I'll show you the little mini of the Durst children that I got.
No, don't. I don't want to see it.
But essentially, I'm not going to run it through them again because they've already done it, so they all know what's in it.
Yeah.
But also, like, I don't. And the answer is I actually don't know because there's a lot I would actually change about Curse of Strahd. Now I've read.
Would you do a different intro to it?
I don't know. Again, it's something to discuss with the players because we've not had that yet. Because I want to have the talk about commitment first because I'm very much happy to be like, we'll run it to its completion because it's a great story and I think it's very engaging. But are we doing it weekly? Is it a monthly thing? Again, I just want to know because then I can adjust and make sure that I give that experience to the players. But I think For me, I might just do a soft reset outside the Durst house and then continue from there.
Yeah.
I'll have that discussion with them. Like, would they want to start from there? There's another hook I can give because we did the I did my own sort of intro into it, which isn't part of the published stuff, but there's a couple of other ways to get into Barovia, which I could easily just put them somewhere else. So
Mm.
I'm going to ask the players because we're all experienced players at that point about restarting something. But it's definitely a big collaborative process. And
Are any of those
yeah.
characters the same characters from other campaigns?
They created them specifically for
Mm.
Curse of Strahd.
Right.
From my understanding, they want to keep playing those characters, maybe with one or two changes of the class or subclass. I think if I was a player and I was restarting an adventure like that, I don't know if I think I mean I have used a character from an unfinished campaign into a current campaign I'm playing with, and it's very, very different. And
Yeah.
I've had to readjust my sort of thinking about it, and because it was like an old artificer build which now is obviously in the new artificer build, so it's a lot of things to go through. So I can't be precious about like, well, I want to finish this character's story and put them in there. It's more like I enjoyed playing that character because of this and this. What would they be like in that setting? So yeah, it's for as a player, I don't know is the answer. I also am very boring in terms of coming up with really cool character concepts, so I'm just like dwarf cleric done. Yeah, that's as far as I go. What about yourself? Would you like, because obviously you've been in and out of Strahd.
Yeah, I went out in and out Strahd for my own reasons of commitment. Well, I just got to those points where I just realized that I can't commit to it, and it was a shame. But yeah, the character that I created for Strahd, I want to explore that character more. I don't think they got enough of a chance to exist, and so if I was ever going to do any campaign, they'd be on the top of my list. But then I've got a billion other characters I want to play. To be honest, Fiona, I haven't played a game for a very, very long time. I am the forever GM at the moment. And so, yeah, someone just needs to ask me to play.
That's the next actually point I wanted to say, is that we were very aware of our GM having this whole homebrew world week after week after week. And we would be like, hey, just say if you want a break, especially if it was
like a 2-week break or so, just doing a one shot or something.
And eventually they did say, because communication is my big thing about stuff. Is like, just be honest, and we won't take it personally if you're like, I need a break for a month. Especially when it gets to higher level stuff. I really struggle with combat. Like I told you, I had to have like a tactic document for my character at level 20, and then coming back, thank God I did that for the final fight, because I was like, D&D Beyond was a bit unhelpful, but I was like, but I have all my flowcharts about where I can go and stuff like that. So highly would recommend that if you're the sort of person that, you know, if you're like, oh, it's a high AC character, well, my character could do this, this, and this. And especially for magic users, if you're like, well, I've got some crowd control. You're like, I've got these spells, but I don't know if they're right. It's like, well, here's some spells that are crowd control. Here's a really cool spell that I would like to use, you know. So that's the thing. I think prepping, I know it sounds really, I don't want to say gatekeeperish, but do learn your character, like be engaged with like what your character is, but don't make that your personality, if you see what it means. Like if you know what your spells do, that's brilliant, because as a GM you're reading loads of things, you're like, I'm always like, great, what does that do? Tell me all about it. And I'm not gonna be like, no, that doesn't work. If you're using it in a cool way, I'll be like, absolutely, that's great. But you can't be like, I guess I'll use this spell, and I'm like, I don't know, man. You got to be confident about using it. And it's tricky. I say that as someone who doesn't know the spell list off the top of my head, but
I think magic using is really difficult. And I think to become really intelligent but deft with it, I find it so hard. I must admit, I do find it very difficult to put myself into that position, because I haven't played a game in such a long time. Like, so the last time I did play, I played Divination Wizard for a bit in Strahd. It is a much more complicated, like, you're always constantly like, it is a whole other skill set that you have to have on top of like the other things you're doing as another player. Like, because I remember the other one I had was a paladin, which again also requires some prepping. But definitely when you're a spellcaster, it's like, okay, what do I need today? So you're already doing that every single time you like long rest. Well, everyone's just like, I heal, I'm done. You've got this whole like moment, and then all you're going to do is be really pissed off and didn't choose the thing you needed. But then also knowing every single one of those spells back and front is quite hard, because there are a lot of them. And I think the fact that it shuts you off of them is helpful in some ways, but also it's kind of like, I didn't know, for example, that Mind Sliver gives you that ability to track someone for an hour afterwards, which is so super useful. But I did it, and then fortunately, because that was able to achieve something. But I think it's knowing all those little intricacies that really makes you I don't know what's the wording I'm looking for, is that if you want to be on the same level as usefulness in some ways as the
Yeah.
bard or as the
Mm.
rogue or something, who can just do, which is a lot simpler, you have to actually put a lot more effort in, and it's actually it's forgotten, I think, sometimes. And I think we've got to remember it is difficult, but
Yeah.
it's part of the game, I guess, in some ways. I don't know.
It totally is, and I think maybe there's. I always see this thing like, well, it's the GM that does everything, and the players they're
Mm,
just playing the world. And I've never been a big fan of that us
no.
versus them thing, and because I don't think it's true. If it is true, I know there are people out there who are the GMs that control everything, or there are
Mm,
players that it's what my character would do. That's something about them themselves rather than the game.
yeah.
And again, that session zero setting expectations and stuff.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I want to say, like, yeah, prepping is very important, but I also want to flip the coin and say forgiveness is also a big thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because my God, like the amount of times I fucked up on something and I felt guilty about it, both as a
Mm,
GM and a player. And I know that our GM, like, he would be thinking about stuff and then be like, I'm so sorry, I got this wrong.
mm,
And as long as you're like having that open conversation about stuff, breaking out a character, because you're not trying to kill people. Like we've definitely not prepped and planned for stuff and we've almost died.
mm,
And the GM's like, I don't know, I don't want to end the story, but I
mm.
don't know what to do. And I was like, I mean, we came into this unprepared. It's like we can talk about this. We're
Well,
not,
that's exactly right. And the one thing I suggest, like, clarify that point on the wizard thing is like, if you can't keep all that information in, it's fine. It's like that's
yeah,
just part of the game. And if you can't, it's not the end of the world. And don't put that pressure on yourself. But it is something you will put on yourself if you're that sort of person.
yeah,
But I think you're right. But the thing I was going to say, the safety tool I think is really useful. That
mm,
is the pause, stop,
and
rewind, fast
rewind.
forward,
Yeah,
because it's useful just as a safety tool generally for other reasons that it's created, such as I can pause now because I'm not comfortable. I want to stop now because I'm really
mm,
uncomfortable. I really need to, stop the game now for whatever reason.
yeah,
But the pause and the stop allow you to then add this rewind. Hey, wait, I really want to go back because I'm not. Either I'm not happy where this is going from the safety point of view, but also like, oh, I feel like right idiot. You know what? I didn't realize when you said earlier,
yeah,
if you were in world, I knew you were going to cast fireball, and I wouldn't have ran into the middle of the room
yeah,
because you said you were going to cast fireball. I thought we were here because we're doing theater of
yeah,
mind. Can we just go
exactly.
back and I'll just read? And that's fine.
Yeah.
And the fast forward is like, okay, the GM, this is boring, or like,
And yeah,
or
like
the
we
safety tool point of view is like, I'm happy for this to happen. I just don't want to be
fade to
involved
black,
in it.
move
Fade to
it.
black.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
remembering it's a safety tool, but it's also a very useful function of the gameplay, as in like
Yes.
use it as I say that to my players on all my streams because I'm like, hey, look, we're trying to make something like a story here. And if you,
Mm,
and also it's really difficult online and not in person and not
yes.
with maps all the time, that you're not always going to be aware of what's going on. You might have misheard something. So
Mm,
feel comfortable. There was a very critical moment in our finale, I will say, where Jeremy Cobb said, hey, just want to pause right now because this could mean something very important for the campaign. And do we want to redo that this way? And I was like, actually, it's fine. I've already got something planned that makes this okay. But it was really good that they felt comfortable enough to pause
that's
the
really
game,
cool.
say,
Mm,
hey, look, just want to check everyone's cool with this. And actually, I didn't, I felt like, oh, maybe I should have said it, but it's because in my mind, I've got a plan. If this happened,
yeah,
I know what I'm going to do. But it was good that they felt comfortable enough to say that.
yeah,
I then could say, I think it's fine. If you're happy, I've got another way of doing this. You keep going.
yeah.
And if you're not happy with what happens, then we can go back. But I think I've got a way
So
around
cool.
this that feels right. Hopefully that
Yeah.
doesn't give away what I'm talking about.
No,
But
no, I
when
know.
but I
Yeah.
think if people come to watch it, I think they'll know what I mean. And it's kind
Mm.
of like it was, but it was, yeah, I think those things are really useful.
To be fair to yourself, Jeremy Cobb is also a DM, so probably has to deal with this as well in that internal
Yeah.
thing. So I think it is that confidence to do that. Maybe comes from experience of playing that as well. But I
Yeah.
completely agree. Having that, like I did the same thing. We in that 10-hour session, we did a lot
Mm,
of planning, and then we were going
mm,
off talking about stuff, and I was like, pause. I know this is important, but I just want to be clear. There are these
yeah.
3 things. Are we going to aim to get the 3 things, or is 2 enough, or what? I just want to
Yeah.
know because
Yeah.
that is because we should do that. And they're like, yes, yes, that's right. And so I will say, admin is a thing, planning is a thing. Have
Yeah.
somebody take notes, whether it's yourself or like you should all take notes. I mean, I say that I don't take notes because I usually record what we're doing for online. And again, some
Yeah.
people might not feel comfortable with doing that. I always record just in case somebody was like, I'd like to watch the last session. Can I have access
Yeah.
to it? And I've got it all on a Google Drive.
Recording them is a really good way of
I
doing
think
it
so.
because we used to have a note taker in our home game that I played before I did a dragon heist, and there was one person who was really good at it. But what was really nice is the DM set up a little like WordPress website where we could just write them all like, our own experiences and fill them in. And I used to just like try do those the next day just off my memory.
Yes.
And sort of memory dump what I had, and then people would go up there and we'd update them. We were really good. And on the Strahd one, I'm still part of the Discord, and I just go and read some of the updates they're having every so often because they just post the notes on there. And I think they're a really useful tool, and they're really fun for just reminding. I think someone doing them is really important, and I think it's a nice thing to keep you connected to the game when you're outside of the game.
I do think that note taking is important. I would say, like, again, if you don't worry about it, I think having a recording of some kind doesn't have to be video. I know some people get very funny about where's it going, etc. I think, like, I've recorded just audio. I brought my recorder and just put it there, and it's just going to be running. I did it for the thing as well, and it was really nice because then we could listen back to it. One of our players tells their mum all about their campaign, and the mum got very invested. So of course he was like, could I have a link to the folder so I could share some of the clips? And I was like, absolutely.
So sweet.
She was in floods of tears after the finale, apparently. So that was actually really lovely as well. And maybe again another key takeaway, telling people who are interested about it. If they're interested. Like, I'm definitely someone who's like, I get a bit ick sometimes, and I'm like, okay, I play this character. There's a lot of information. I'm like,
it's like telling someone about your dreams, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But if somebody's interested, like, so usually somebody who isn't directly connected to D&D, they can get really invested in, but how do you come up with all this stuff and how exciting? And it's like, that's really nice, actually, and taking that time to appreciate how they're really invested in your characters. It is rare. I will say it is rare, but it's, always take that time. If somebody's interested, take the time to tell them about it, because then you will feel that catharsis.
I think so. I think the points we're talking about is very much like the keys are communication, I think, is which is always the fundamental. And I think this, as much as well coming from the players, it's also the GM and both of you having this conversation about where the check-ins regularly on like, how are you feeling about the campaign? Where's it going? Do you want more of this? Do you want more of that? Your great idea of, which I think we should bring up in addition to that, which is the sort of like, in terms of the boundaries and foundries.
Yes, I was going to talk about those. I'll quickly describe. So this is an improv thing that I learned from my improv teacher, Katie Shute. Essentially, safety is great. It's very important. We love safety, but it can drain the energy out the room, because you don't want to be that asshole who's talks about I don't know, we're at a funeral, and then you're like, oh, but I didn't want to talk about funerals because I've recently had that, and you feel bad. Then as a result of doing this safety stuff, sometimes you're like, oh no, I just want to have fun and I don't want to hurt anyone and I just want to get on with the game, and there's all this stuff I have to remember now on top of everything else. So what I try and do is talk about this idea of foundries, which is like, what's something in role-playing games, does it have to be specifically tied to a system or a story that makes you, oh, I love this? And it could be literally anything from, I want everyone to have a character moment where they're in the spotlight, they get to use a specific skill. Or it could be, and this is an improv example, I love singing, and any chance I get to do it, it's great. And what it is that you just put it out there, and so should something come up organically, and I have to emphasize the word organically so hard at times, then we can work towards it so that it happens. Like, one thing for me, and I always say this as a GM, is that I love it when players have outside of the box thinking about solutions, and like go, we're going to do this, and I'll be like, are you sure? And they're like, yes. And I go, okay, let's play it through. Let's have the scene. Let's describe it. Because I love justifying stuff, which I'm like, how is this going to work? Because it's funny. I like being put on the spot like that. It's something I absolutely love because it's ridiculous. I don't feel like scared about it, because no matter what happens, the story continues. At the end of a session, which other RPGs do quite well, I think about the Between that does this quite well, Jason Cordova's stuff, is something called Stars and Wishes, which we actually put into our Alien stuff. Was that at the end we go, what are our stars? You go around each of the players, and you could be something that the star is something that you really enjoyed, whether it's something that you did, and that's okay, or something that somebody else did, and that's okay. And you don't have to give stars to every person. Like, if you're like, I was just so in the zone, but I thought this was really good, I love this, perfect. And then a wish is something that you want to happen in the next session, or I'd love to have more interaction with this character, etc., so that people know about it. And it's just a nice positive way to end a session that's not tied to the game mechanic of you get XP. It's just something like, I had a really nice time, thank you. So I love having that sort of positive reinforcement. And I know it's sort of, some people feel it's a bit icky. I think just do it. Don't spend too much time on it. Don't focus on it. Just go for it. And then people just people enjoy it because they know you set up
Mm.
what the rules are. It's like describing a board game. Like, here are the rules. Don't worry about it. Just here's some things to think about, and now we play the game. You know?
Yeah. With that, there's two. I think setting up those as expectations are really good. I think the beginning chat and the end chat between the game session is always useful for me. But I know some people are like, I just want to sit down, I want to get on and play, you know, and then I'm done. All right, nice to see you. Bye. If that's what you want to do, that's perfectly fine. But I think to build a rapport with your players and to have that time at the beginning is always really useful just to download. So I think these are really useful parts of D&D. And then after the session, always try and leave yourself that little bit of time just to be able to just go like, check in, check everyone's okay. Now, I know some people that have a much more structured system. I've been a part of games that are streamed games, particularly I remember that was very much like, all right, we're going to have a debrief session now and we're going to talk about things that I like, things that we didn't like. What do we feel our best moments were? And it was a very much like an actor's studio sort of, and that was the way that they wanted to run it. They came from an acting background, the person who was the GM on that. So I totally understand. They were like, that was their way of doing it. And I saw benefits in it. I saw some things from it that I wouldn't do personally, because I think it can become very much actors like questioning yourself and very overly self-critical, and I think sometimes that can be a bit too much for some people, but myself included. So but I think things I do like about it and the things I've done for Bowie's is I've had interviews with everyone as like so afterwards, just as a, which is a recorded thing, but we also took time to do it like not part of the recording, just to be like, how did you find your character develop? What did you think about it? What were the bits that you really loved? What were the relationships you think were great? What moments did you find your character was able to shine in? Or did you find things about your character that you weren't able to tap into? And if you had the more time, what would you want to do? And I think doing those on a small basis and on at the end and in, you know, as like crits or whatever they have, you know, you have an architecture school, like review times is like organized is really useful and for everyone involved, not just the GM as to what more do I need to put in, but also as a player, self-reflection on things, I think is like really fun, but in a really positive way. But I think
in a positive way, I think you have to emphasize this is not a punishment. Because we always forget a rule. We always like, I'm always like, oh shit, I have all these cool abilities, etc. There's no point in like what's happened. You know, it's supposed to be like, what do you want out of this game? And I think some people, again, it feels like admin, and I know people are like, I just want to play the game, but it's so important, especially if you're playing with new people or people who've not played before. You just want to make sure that they want to come back, because the last thing they want to do, they come for a session and they haven't had anything to do, or they don't get it, or they're worried about asking questions. That's always the big thing. When certainly when I'm running a new RPG, I'm like, ask me questions, stop the game, ask me. If I go too fast, because I know I go 100 miles a minute, just ask, sorry, just to be clear. And it actually comes on to another thing, is accommodations, which some people may want to do as well. So obviously in the age of going online as well, some people maybe struggle to engage a little bit, because obviously it's on a screen rather than person. So stuff like subtitles, asking at the beginning, saying, hey, what can I do to make your experience a little bit better as a GM?
Yeah, I found the Zoom and Teams captions are actually really useful. I've started using, I don't use them for my stream game because they will come up on the stream, but and I know that they are useful, but I don't think they're as good actually as the YouTube ones are.
Agreed.
But I find the Teams one I use on my Teams chats that I have at work, because I'm like, what did you just, there's like rooms, we're talking to rooms of people, and sometimes, and it's just, it does pick up a lot more, and being able to scroll back through them if you miss something.
They're getting the name or something.
Really, I think they're really useful.
But even like, so that's sort of like accommodations for the room. But like, for example, I'll be like, hey, what's the hard stop for everyone? I will check in closer to the time. I want to go for another 10 minutes. We'll have a bio break. The one I always have is like in meetings, go, hey, so my accommodation is that I might get a parcel, so I might need to step away for a few seconds, or I might get a phone call. I have to have my phone on me because of this. And it's just being like normalizing that. I
always forget the bio breaks, because I just keep, my brain has got too many things going on. It's in like shut down playing a guitar mode.
Yeah,
and I need someone to go.
I have a clock very close to me, and I'm like, this is the time. So the same for the stream we did for the Girls Run These Worlds. I was like, we definitely have to have a 15-minute break at some point.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's going to be the same time every time. And then we'll go over a couple of minutes, and then I'll be like, right, but we're still back in 15 minutes. I'm not going to, just because we played a little more, I'm not going to reduce.
Well, we did that with Dragon's Jewel when we did the stream, and it was like, because that used to go on for like 3 hours.
Yeah.
You're like, okay. But then, always doing the half hour before you thought you were going to finish. Where are you? Or just when you're like in that last half hour, I always say, okay, we've got to a point now. There's 15 minutes. We can either do this bit or we could do that. And like, as I said, I was trying to finish Bowie's the other night. I was like, I knew that Chloe had an audition the next day. So I'm kind of like, but we're also like, we're in the battle. We've done the battle. Okay, we got a bit, we can do this little finale bit. So we did a bit of finale bit. And I said, hopefully it'll take half an hour. We got to the end of that half an hour. I was like, there's still more I want to do. And I want to give it time. And I don't want to do it at midnight anyway. And you're tired. So let's just stop now. The GM, understandably, and it just is the way, you do have to take more responsibility for those things, because you are the one that's managing the show, really, if you know what I mean, managing everything. And so you're in a position of power within the dynamic. And so I think, and I'm not saying that, I just think that's just naturally how it goes. So I think you've got to be much more conscientious, I think, as a GM than you do as a player.
Yeah. It's not about having all the lore of the story. It is about the welfare of your players as well, which I think people do miss a little bit. And I just wanted to say, because you mentioned that sort of idea of like the post, sort of pre and post sort of chats. And so one thing I absolutely miss about being online is that we're obviously in person. You'd get there, we'd spend about half an hour getting some food and we'd be chatting away, and then we'd obviously do the 2.5 hours, whatever. And then we'd stop packing up. We still have the, oh, that was so good. And then, all right, and then we travel home and we have that time to digest all that stuff. Online, oh, I'm going to be late. Can we start at 8? Sure. Oh, wait, we've got to get into it. Okay, it's now 10:30. All right, I'm going to go now. Bye. And it's just like, I miss that. And so I definitely spend the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes of each session now desperately like sort of going, how is everyone? Let's have a chat. And then before we get into the game, because I know people's time online is different to when you're being in person. So that's it's just, I miss that quite a bit, but I try and factor that in now to my sessions and be like, let's at least have the pre-chat and catch up with people. And it doesn't matter about the story because we'll get to the story. I do miss the post chats. People are like, oh, it was so good, etc. So I always try in the WhatsApp go, thank you so much to whoever it was. I really loved X, Y. I do the stars and wishes by myself if I need to.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Taylor in my games most of the time, so we've got 40 minutes of chat already lined up. It's lovely, and I love it, and I wouldn't give it up for anything because it's it's really nice because I really love those times because it's just a moment to catch up with these people you spend all this time with. I think it's really positive, and I love it. Some of them I wish I recorded because I think they would make their own thing. That there was a couple of them that we were just like, Hamilton, why are you not recording this? I'm like, I don't know.
It's gold. It's gold.
But the whole point of it is that it isn't recorded. That's the whole fun of it because actually it's about the moments that you don't that are personal in some ways. So I really enjoy those. But the post ones, I know I normally finish late, so we don't get them. But that's kind of why the beginning ones are really good because it's like, hey, let's just check in. Last time we were doing this, and also just like we've been a bit off and on schedule wise, so it's just like, okay, let's just remind ourselves where we were and all that sort of stuff.
Ground yourself before going in.
Yeah.
The last thing I kind of wanted to talk about was the emotional bleed.
Yes.
So obviously being a 5-year campaign and also the alien stuff was really interesting, both very different kinds of stories.
Yeah.
And I hadn't realized really, and it comes to talking about what you sort of mentioned before, this idea of closure. So when we had our break before we did the in-person stuff, I was so excited to play and I couldn't wait. And then it got delayed. And it just felt like, let's just be honest about it. If we can't do it in person, let's just do it online. And I know people really wanted to do it, but for me, it was more important to finish the campaign and the story we told because we put in so much effort. And I think having something in your thing saying like the debrief in the sense of like, how are you feeling? Did you do anything that you felt wasn't in character and it's affected you like this? But also like, we've had people in our campaigns who started drawing art of the characters. Like I have on my wall 2 framed pictures of my character from the 5 year, and it meant so much to me that they spent the time doing that. And having that emotional bleed afterwards, and like we cried, all of us cried at the end of that session because we'd finally done it and it felt good. But for me, I'd say the gap between when we said we are going to do it and now, it kind of affected me bad mental health wise, because I was like, well, what's the point? People don't care about it, and I felt selfish for thinking that, but people did care about it, but we had to have that gap. And then on the flip side, GMing or being the game mother for Alien, that was very interesting because I didn't realize how attached I was to the player characters who did very well. We had this slow build up, bad stuff started happening. I was killing off characters one by one, but I was trying to do it in a sort of very clinical way because one of the lines was they don't very much in gore, and at the end only one of them escaped, and they did their sort of epilogue, like reading out the transmission thing, and I sent them the script for it and they did it, and I just remember saying at the end, going, and that's the end of Alien, and I realized I was crying, and it was just such an emotional thing. I was like, oh my god, we've done it. I had tears of joy, and that's but I didn't realize how that had affected me, and I had to like sort of go away and think about certain things afterwards, like killing certain characters and stuff, and actually take the time to think and sit with those thoughts and like, why do I feel like this, even though that person doesn't exist? It is something that I've,
Yeah.
so it was just, so I would say like, obviously taking care of yourself is one thing, so, but those feelings are valid.
And allow them.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
I was feeling that at the end, like, because I'm kind of, we haven't kind of finished it, but at the end of it, I was like, oh my gosh, this has been a long time happening since, and I've wanted to do this idea for a long time as well. And it's just like, it is emotional. And I think that's fair. Like any endeavor is, it really, when anything finishes and ends, it's always going to be that way. I think it's very fair to allow yourself to have those moments and do them in the way you want to do them. That doesn't mean you have to be around people at the time. If you want to go away, or that's just how you want to do it, but feel free and do give yourself that opportunity, because the catharsis is like I was talking to you when you were talking about getting to this point. I was talking about alternate ways of doing things, wasn't I? In sense, and you didn't have to use them, but I was saying I think that if a player can't make it, or GM's not able to make it, or someone, the ones that are still wanting to do that, I suggested, why doesn't everyone get together and just sit down and have like a talk through finishing off of what happened, and give yourself that sort of like, everyone has their turn, like hold the bunny or whatever, sort of like pass the parcel sort of thing, like everyone gets to hold the sort of talking stick and have their moment, and everyone gets to chip in as much as they want to and feel very, and allow sort of those interactions and sort of just play out the storyline, because it's really sad the Shattered Realm story, I've got that just is left in the wind. And if I was going to play another character, actually, I've just reminded me when saying is that the NPC I made in that is one of my favorite NPCs, and I want to play them as a character and find out their journey, because they're just like, they had a journey to go on. And we had an emotional moment in that game with like Luke's character. They had some really emotional moments between this character and Luke particularly, but all of them. But there was this, that was left unresolved is a real shame, and it's a real like thing against me that I'm like I just am really annoyed. I'm really annoyed with myself that it couldn't work because of all the other things, but like that never got finalized. And it's like, I've always going to have that feeling of it's unresolved. And I think if you can go through, I've written little notes for like what they would do, but I think if you can do that as a group, it's really
I really love that idea of like talking about, there's a game, an RPG called, I think it's NPCs of the Past or something like that, where the party, or whatever system, you come around and you mourn the loss of an NPC, and you go around and do that sort of almost like a funeral type thing, or remembrance sort of thing. And it's very similar to what you were saying. And I just thought, I think the thing is, if we did it online, as I said, it was like nearly 10 hours. No one wants to be online for 10 hours, and it would have been bitty because we had combat. We wanted to do the epilogue on the same day because we knew like if we didn't do it, it wouldn't happen. So it was, and I highly recommend like doing an epilogue. Like you have the big fight, taking a break, and then coming back and doing it, even if it's just an hour, about what the characters would do and what happens in the future. What do they? Are they still friends? Are they this? And it could be as short as you want, or as silly as one. Like mine was incredibly short. My character had got some sort of tattoos or some runes from her god that said like, you should go to Sigil. And I was like, cool. I go to Sigil, and then I take a ship with me and I explore the rest of the multiverse. And that was it. Whereas the other two had a bit more in depth which then related to what I was doing. But I just was like, for me, it is very short and simple. But for other people, they wanted to do a little bit more. And I just having that time to do that and be like, and thus ends the scene, and thus ends the character, and then you can still talk about it to other people. And it's just, the emotional bleed is incredibly real, because I think ultimately, whilst I know like not every character is just a extreme version of myself, although I will say they normally are, any character I create will have a part of me in it. And so when you put in so much effort to something and then it doesn't finish, or it doesn't, it's just like you feel sad, And so I think my takeaway is that, again, having those, we're going to do it for 8 sessions. We can be flexible, we can do that and just be honest about it. But also, if you're like, I wanted to continue the story, we review that and we talk about where that character would have gone after this one shot, And I've done that with other one shots as well, like the Radiant Citadel one shots where a character's been split up, and they're like, well, what happens? Oh, well, we go and search for this other character. I'm like, great, well, here's an epilogue that's perfect for that. And then we're like, cool, we can always come back to it, but it's not left on an unsatisfactory. Oh, well, they found it. Like it's something that we've all agreed from, and I think that's so important in any game. And it's only something I've realized very recently.
I think that's the key to it, isn't it? Really, catharsis. That's it.
Catharsis.
Catharsis.
Yeah, and I know other people play different games. I know some people will listen to this and be like, "Well, I just play it for this, that, and the other, the hack and
Yeah,
slash," and they're like, "Cool,
but that's fine.
perfect." But like,
I think it's hard to not get too attached to, no matter what you're doing with
Yes.
those characters. It's hard not to get attached to them. I think video games are an example of that. Like
Yeah.
characters that I've had from that, I will always have an affinity to Cloud Strife from Final Fantasy VII. You know, it's one of the such a long game, and all they go through, and Eris, oh my gosh, you know, still
I
not
know.
over it.
You feel it,
Yeah,
don't you? And it's
yeah.
and I know it's maybe a very weird thing to relate to, but like the death of celebrities. Like I remember the year of when David Bowie died and then Alan Rickman died, and it was so weird because obviously I don't know them. I didn't say anything,
but they're just a part of your life.
they're part of your life. And I remember my mum, when Alan Rickman died, messaged me and said, "Are you okay?" And I wasn't. I realized that because he was one of my favorite actors, and I was reading his diaries now, and what a just a nice guy he was.
Yeah, I know exactly. He's one of the good ones. Yeah,
exactly. And like it's that sort of thing going, that's such a shame what the effect he had around other people through whether his films or his acting. And it's just that's why I definitely want to take the time with games, no matter what. Have those safety tools, just do it, you know, like
it's like, you know, they always say watching a TV show, you get emotionally attached to a character, but that is so secondary to you. Then playing a video game and reading a book, because they're in your, like reading a book, it's in your head. So you get so much more attached to them because you're telling yourself a story and you're imagining the world. So there's so much more investment personally. I think books are more than video games, but video games, you're controlling the character. So there is some agency you have over them. But when you're talking about role playing, you are literally the character. It is an embodiment of yourself in some ways. You are physically manifesting them. You're speaking they have your voice or a affectation of your voice. And it's very difficult. And everyone can see actors that have found themselves in issues related to acting and having to inhabit characters. And I think most of our people playing these games are not trained actors, are not being helped and dealt with these things by, I'm assuming actors are given training in do not get too engaged, do not get too attached to the character, how to separate yourself, how to draw yourself back into reality. Because
absolutely.
I think of, not going too dark a one, let's just go for Jim Carrey doing Andy Kaufman. And how they became literally that character and inhabited them, and people got really angry at them and they became kind of aggressive and sort of became this. There's a whole show about it, Andy and Jim. Is it called Jim and Andy or something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
A really great documentary. I recommend watching it. But Jim Carrey is a professionally trained actor, which would have had people around them managing that. There were people aware of the situation, trying to, you know, and when he came out of it, finding that self again. I remember hearing Johnny Greenwood talking about every time he goes on tour with Radiohead, he has to take a week to himself afterwards to readjust to reality from being this person. I mean, this is extreme cases, but I think we should all be fair on ourselves to know that this is a very emotional, engaging thing that we're doing.
Immersive.
So immersive. So take care of yourself, people.
I definitely think I count the people that I play with in that weekly game of D&D some of the closest friends that I have, and we weren't necessarily very close at the beginning, but because we did that, and so definitely a high level of trust, which I know is so difficult to do. But again, that open communication. Basically, this episode was called "Open Communication." How important? Is it?
Exactly.
Thank you, Hamilton, for letting me talk about it, because it's been a very interesting conversation to actually get to the end of something that's so big, and I know you've had similar thoughts on stuff like that as well. So it's definitely, if you've got the time, put in the time and the effort. I would not regret it at all. I had such a good time, and I'm glad I can look back on bits of it and see it online, but also like I've got art. You know, I'm very lucky that I've got to the end of something. And one of the final things I wanted to say is that for us, it did end at level 20 because we got to that point. But it's interesting with D&D because obviously it's like, well, level 20, that's it. And it's like, it's very hard to go beyond, I guess. But I don't know. Like I
mean, you can always find the 2E stuff that had level 30 up to level 30. And I think multi-class, you know, take a new class, you know, just take another level, 20 levels of something else. Or I think if you wanted to, you can make it work. It becomes very difficult for the DM.
Yes. And I think
take everything away. Just go, that's it. You stripped all your powers. New level 10.
New game plus, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
if you want to continue, if the story is not ended and it's not ended as always, like we save the world. But yeah, I think it's having that conversation. Do you want to continue? Like for me, I was very much like, once this arc is over, I don't see anywhere where we can go. But that's just the story we built, and that
I
I was
think
totally fine with that.
Can I just add to this before we do
Please.
go away then? Because I
Yeah.
think I talked about this in another podcast, and there's something about it that we really got onto. It's like, what defines an ending? Like, how do you define an ending? And I think since then, two things have happened that I can use as an additional benefits to it. But the one I used at the time was I used Patterson, the movie, as a really good example of how it explains how I see a story in D&D. And I think people that I see a story as a fundamental aspect of story. And it doesn't mean you have to follow this. And I think you can add to it. But Patterson is literally a movie about, if anyone knows Adam Driver, he's a bus driver, Adam Driver. He's got a wife who's an artist, and he writes poetry. And it's a Jim Jarmusch film. So if you know Jim Jarmusch, it's very it's just esoteric in its own way. And you come into it, he writes some poetry, he exists in this world, experiences the people around him, has some interfaces, but there's lessons learned, and there are things that you see. But actually the story, what it showed to me is the fundamental of a story is in its experience of something, experience of a life or a moment in time, to explain something about those people or about the event. And that event doesn't need to be extreme, nor does it need, it can be as simple as just, this is just a life. And then, and not much happens to it, but this is a very interesting person with an interesting life. And we see it and we leave it. And the ending is as satisfying as we save the world, Marvel Universe. And I think Endgame is just as good as that. There's definitely a difficulty I find watching any Marvel movie, we've talked about this before, after the Endgame, because it had the Endgame. But I think when I look at Critical Role, you could have ended Critical Role season 1 after the Chroma Conclave.
Yeah, agreed.
Right?
Yep.
Boom, massive. But then they added another layer to it, and then spoilers, Vecna. End it on that great ending. That is a big world. But like the battle with Dordak was just so like epic and legendary that I think if they went and that's it, I'd have been perfectly satisfied. I think. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's having those conversations.
But then Mighty Nine, that very much doesn't end at level 20. They're not even, I think they're level
14 or 15.
14, 15.
I was kind of stunned. I was like, oh, I guess we're here now. Yeah. It's just because they were like, well, we're just going to keep going and follow this thing. And then Matt was like, yeah, well, that's the end of the story, the main story. And you're like, well, okay. Again, maybe it's just the completionist in us going, well, what about the side quests? So
there is that. And I think I could have been around with those characters for much longer. And I think people, but then there's also that, well, leave you wanting more. But also those characters weren't actually ever, and when you look at it, ever the Vox Machina. They weren't the heroes of the classic fantasy heroes. They were just very much who they were. And I think it really fit the story, fit the characters they've created. I haven't watched enough of Critical Role season 3 to know how that's going to play out. But I think of like the Erois campaign, again, set up very much like the Vox Machina. This is going to lead. There's always from the beginning been, there is an evil. And that one is very much like, they are going to fight and they're fighting the evil right now. The big BBEG is happening at this moment. And they're going on to the second one, I think. My point that I was getting to was that when we're talking about all that communication, is that the end goal can be anything you want it to be.
Yes.
And that can be communicated throughout all of this process. And the catharsis can come from you knowing what that is more than anything. But also feel comfortable that it doesn't have to end at the big end of the world session.
Yeah.
It can end where you feel like we've existed with these characters to a point that we feel like we've learned from them. Yeah. I feel like you have to learn. I feel like a story requires learning, personally, but that's just because I think that's education's drilled that into us.
It's the hero's journey, right? The hero comes back somewhat changed, but they might not have changed that much, and that's okay.
That point can be anywhere on that scale that you thought it was going to be. I'm doing this, and I'm physically moving my arms.
There's lots of hand gestures, lots of like pointing to like, where is she? Moments of like,
where are they? Yeah, I don't know. That was my little moment I wanted to add to it. That was all.
No, thank you. And I think maybe looking back at it, is there anything I would have changed about the D&D campaign? I wouldn't change the story. I wouldn't change the characters. I wondered if I would have preferred a different system which I know is like
Ah.
gasp D&D, but I think because obviously that was where I know, but that's that's what we started on. I can play it very well. I've played it weekly for many months, but now because I've read other games, like would we have benefited from doing say Warhammer Fantasy role play? And I'm like maybe.
I'm gonna say, Fiona,
Yeah.
spoiler alert.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's my favorite.
Oh,
I think it's my favorite system.
I think it's an interesting system for sure, but again, not going to talk about it too much.
I love this, just the basic dice mechanic.
It's
I
great.
just like D100s. I like the D100 system. It's so easy, so easy to sell to someone. The fact that the starter set has a page to basically explain how you play this game.
I will say, I think, again, my shout out would be like, if you wanted to look at Warhammer Fantasy, read the starter set stuff.
Yeah.
Like I did find the core book a little bit too much. But
I think it can be as crunchy as you want it to be, but the base, that's what I think is like. I look at it, go, this is really crunchy. There's so much going on, but that's because the fundamental basis building block of it is like so easy.
So easy.
And you're just like, it's the most crunchiest, simplest system. I know. I can't explain it better than that, but we'll talk about it more. But
we'll talk about it more because that's the thing. I think some of the D&D stuff, like I said, when I come back to it, I would forget things. I felt a bit crusty around the edges about like, I don't know if I've got it. Whereas other RPGs, which don't necessarily rely on leveling, like Quest doesn't really. It's not about like how many hit points you have. It's the
One Ring.
One Ring. Shiver to an extent, which I'll talk to you about at some other point, because that again has a really interesting leveling system where a lot of the skills they're attached a little bit to the game mechanic, but it's all role play stuff rather than what D&D is like. Here's some extra things when you roll dice. So that was the only thing I wanted if I would play a different system, and like maybe a settingless system. Perhaps obviously we've got the Orc license coming out and all that sort of thing. So that's the only thing I thought of. I was like, well, maybe it would have been a different system, would have made it shine a little bit more for me, but that's just because I've played it for so long now, and obviously we've had all the stuff with the OGL stuff. So, and I've always had an interest in other systems. So that was the only thing I could think of.
Talking about other systems,
yeah,
aren't you playing in something live tonight at 7 p.m. on Twitch? And maybe people should check this out.
Yes. Well, by the time this episode goes out, so that'll be tomorrow when you're listening, future, past, whatever. But yes, I am going to be playing in a game called Inspire Isles, which is done by our wonderful friend Rich at Hatchling Games, and that is a very, very gentle, lovely, like high fantasy RPG about teenagers going to a world that is sort of very Arthurian legend, etc. Very simple dice mechanic, but most importantly, it sort of helps you learn sign language, both BSL and ASL, which is very, very exciting actually, because again, talk about accessibility and accommodation stuff. More and more people are starting to look to how can we bring other people to the table that are usually restricted in some way, and whereas online stuff that's helping a little bit with in terms of maybe physical disability, like actual sort of like getting that communication across is so important as well. So yes, so that will be first session tonight, which I'm very looking forward to.
Is that going to be on YouTube after the fact then, or is it?
Or will eventually. It'll be Twitch for a little bit, and then I will be putting links everywhere. But yes, by the time this episode comes out, we'll have the first session out, which will be very exciting. So.
Exciting.
Yes. So, Hamilton, I know you've talked about Bowies and stuff like that, but where can we find you if we're looking for you on the internet in a nice, positive manner?
You can find me at the Dragon DM, all one word, on Twitter. You can find me at Hamilton_DM on Instagram. I do more Warhammer on that than I do on the Twitbox. I also might have been contacted by the editors to talk about Blade Runner today, maybe. That might be happening a bit sooner than we thought, so that's kind of exciting. So
very exciting. Oh
yeah, I've re-listened to 2 of them now, so it's good fun. It's good fun.
That's very fun. Yeah, and yeah, finally for me, obviously I run one of my. Yeah, what about me? What about me? I run my rolling podcast, twice monthly RPG one shot podcast. When I got into D&D, I was also looking at some other games, and that essentially is what this podcast is about. We've got some. We're currently doing the Between that's just coming out just now, but we've also got other games coming out. We've got Die. We've got The Machine, which is a solo. Maybe you've heard of this, Hamilton. It's a solo RPG, but she's done asynchronously with other people. So we have my friend Maddie, who was on the Alien stream with me, is in Inspire Isles, and they are putting up a solo RPG channel called A Game of One's Own. And basically, The Machine is like, I write some prompts about something, and my character is done away with, and then Maddie's character will be able to find these prompts and then carry on the work of the machine. And it's the idea that you normally would pass it through a lot of people, and then at the end you'd have a debrief about like what this machine was and how did it affect people, etc.
Geordie LaForge and forgotten her name, the creator of the machine. You know, when he has to use makes the AI version of her to help work out how the system works, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly like that. But the themes of obsession and that sort of thing. So that'd be a lot of fun. So I need to record that ASAP because Maddie's expecting it as some sort of note form. I think by Friday. So
okay,
good luck, Fiona. Finally. Also, I know because I didn't mention it last time, but we have an offer code. If you like us, like Terrain, you like stuff like this, well, you can get a 10% offer code at Third Space Gaming in the UK. It's your friendly local game store in Burnley. Type in the offer code DMBC into checkout. Use your hamster hands and do it on your big typewriter, and yeah, get 10% off your first order. So please go check them out. They've been very, very helpful and loving, and I appreciate them very much. And they're from Burnley, so good stuff.
I'm moving very slowly on my camera, but I want to say, come to our Discord.
Yes,
we have a Discord now, and it's a nice place to be. I think I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, it's been very nice to wake up to lots of messages and I'm like, oh no, somebody hating me. No, it's not. Everyone's just really lovely there. So yeah, with Aware and DMBC Discord. So the link will be in our link tree. Hamilton's been doing some excellent posting of stuff whilst I've been like busy with my head in the sand doing other things. But yeah, so come check us out there. And yeah, I think that's it. Is there anything you want to add, Hamilton?
That's it. That's all I've got for today.
It.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, folks. We'll see you on the Discord, and we'll also see
you on the flip side.
side.